About 10 years ago, I realized I had a mental disease. I think most people call it imposter syndrome. I didn't know what to call it. I found myself in rooms with people who I had printed pictures of them and had them on my wall. I found myself in conversations with people who I had quoted, like I wrote a quote of them on my slides 10 years earlier. And I just kept asking myself constantly, what am I doing here? Like, how did I get here? It's hard because your parents are really excited for you when you become something that's worth talking about. But for you, if you never believed that you could have get there in the first place, it's a very complex feeling. I live in the future, as Saul just described. I'm controversial. I create high-definition contrast in many people's minds. I've had death warnings. But I come from the past. It is history that I use to figure out the future. And today I want to share with you a story that I've never shared before, which is, how is it that my past helps me understand the future in a way that allows me to navigate it by helping each other have a higher level of responsibility for the type of future that we have. Is anyone in this room brave enough to say that they were alive in 1976? Okay. That's some good courage. And if you were alive in 1976, you probably ate food. And your food was probably cooked from a proper stove or an oven. I was born in 1976, and this is what was used to cook my food. This is a mud oven. Anyone ever had food from a mud oven? Okay. You make it with mud, and then you bake it in the sun. And it's one of the crown jewels of a home where I was born in South America. It's how everything happens. If this thing breaks, the whole system breaks down. Okay? This is how food was cooked. So I grew up in an environment without television, without electricity. My entire studies were done on a kerosene lamp. Like literally, I studied at night with a little lamp next to me. And I was studying about things about the future. I never, ever, ever read non-scientific books. Like the first fictional book I read was Animal Farm. And that was way in my teens, okay? I was eating from a mud fireside while studying physics and chemistry and technology. And it didn't really move that fast. By 1986, my parents had upgraded. This is a concrete oven. Now this one's fascinating because it doesn't break down, but the heat that emanates from it is tremendous. The mud oven would hold the heat, but a concrete oven, the heat would emanate. So neighbors would bring their pots and put it next to your concrete oven because it would heat their stuff up in the meantime. We were like celebrities. And by the time I was 20, my father had mustered enough to purchase one of these. You ever seen one of these? Man, this was like a Tesla Model S. This thing didn't work with wood. You could pour the kerosene down the side, and it had this little thing that would light the fire underneath. You could turn it off and turn it on when you want. You can lift it up and go cook somewhere else. My mother didn't have to cook outside in the sun because you couldn't cook with one of those mud ones in the house because the soot that came from it would darken all the blinds in the house. And if you're anything like us, you had to have blinds in the house. I lived in a very, very different period of time from where I lived before and where I live now. And I just studied these things. Why does this work this way? What's going on? And I started to learn about America. And the first thing I learned was they had a lot of candy over there, like chocolate. You just choose things, okay? And so by 1992, I had a chance to migrate to the US. Now think about the context of my life. No television still. No television. Yeah, we had some electricity now. It's kind of weird, right? Because it was on and off. You had these things called blackouts. So you would just keep your kerosene lamps on standby. It's like a backup generator. 1992, myself, my mother, and my brother and I, we migrated to the US. And after we sold everything we had about $98 as a family. My brother and I got here. The first thing we spent the first 50 cents on was a Crunch candy bar. Yeah, I still love Crunch candy bars. I wish they would make like a low-fat, low-calorie version, but amazing. Got here in 1992. I want you to think about the startling difference. We didn't own a television. I'd seen movies, but only in movie theaters. I'd heard about things like computers. Never actually used one. We get here. First thing, I'm completely surprised by the amount of limousines. As soon as we came out, JFK, I saw limousines all over the place. And I'm like, shit, I thought only Eddie Murphy had a limousine based on what I saw in the movies, but it's just limos all over the place. And I'm thinking, holy crap, I've been living in the past, okay? I was completely blown away by highways. Confused by parkway, because you don't really park there, you drive there. Completely confused by driveway, because you only park there. But I was like, wow. I'm 16 years old. I'm fairly smart because I'm well-read, and my mind is just blown because I just traveled 40 years into the future on a 5.5-hour flight. It's like me dropping you guys in 2059. And my favorite, because I love peanut butter. My mom sent me to the store. It was called a Key Food. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the Key Food brand. To go buy some stuff. And back where I come from, I didn't even know what the brand of the peanut butter was. It was just peanut butter because there was only one type of peanut butter in the store. So I walk into the Key Food, I get to the aisle, I see the peanut butter aisle. There's like 25 types of peanut butter to choose from. And I'm like, holy crap. Initial response is excitement. Second response is complete confusion. I'm literally there picking up peanut butter bottles, reading the back of it to figure out what the difference is between the brands. I'm looking at this one has 200 milligrams of, wait, there was salt in here? And I'm like completely confused. And then I finally like lean down. I'm like, what's going on here? They're not that different. They're all the same thing. They just have a different name on it. Bottle sizes are the same. Amounts are the same. Prices are fairly the same. And I was introduced to marketing. An open permission slip to lie about your brand to differentiate from the other. With no recourse for the lies. And I realized not only I was living in the past, I was living in a world of scarcity. There's a moment where I completely sort of transitioned from appreciating scarcity to realize that my target was abundance. I'd never seen a television. The only thing I've ever cooked food on was a stove. and I saw a microwave, and this was my expression. I'm not making this up. This is a known joke in my family that is told over dinners and barbecues annually. You remember when Richie taught that TV could cook food? Because that's me, I'm figuring out, I'm like, holy shit, what's up? This is a television. Wait, this guy's sticking food in the television? This is amazing. So like it's not just advertising the food, you can pull the food out of the television. This is what happens when you were literally weeks ago, I was living 40 years in the past. And so I went on this journey. You name it. I got really good at PowerPoint, which means you can be really successful in America. There wasn't a single job that I wasn't good at because I'd mastered PowerPoint. I'd published books, given TED Talks, had patents, became a CEO, bought companies, sold companies, you name it. There should be a university of PowerPoint. It would be better than Harvard. And I'm at success. And the day I hit success was the day I contracted a disease. What the heck am I doing here? How did I end up in this room? Just 12 years ago, I thought the microwave was a television. And I realized that I had grown now a platform to do something good with what is a 1 in 100 million chance that I'd survived what I went through. Not a lot of people have that immigrant story. There's like 1,000. And so I started to study history more deeply to understand how is it that human beings evolve. I realized that my super skill was to travel time. I treat time as a variable. I treat time as a contingent. I study the Akashic records. I named my son Akash because I believe that we can all tune into the past and tune into the future as we see fit. And here is what drives me today. Human beings, the only reason we are well today to the extent that we are well is because we figured out how to take raw materials that we either find or comes from us, and we create a better world with it. Here's what I mean. Our ancestors only had land in the beginning. That was it. It was all, imagine like a couple thousand years ago, ain't nothing here, it's just land. Like the first startup was 2 cave people, men and women, deciding that they had this great idea that they're going to rub rocks together and create this amazing thing called fire that would create heat and light. Imagine being a venture capitalist funding that. Right? Like, how do you seed that? Right? You give them more rocks, right? So land was the first resource, and then there was labor. Labor helps us as a species get well. The idea that a human being might be paid for their labor when it was first introduced was considered blasphemy. Blasphemy for 100 years. For 100 years, the general receptiveness of the idea that a human being should be paid for their labor, this is like pre-slavery, was considered blasphemy. It was uncouth to think that a man might have worth. The idea that our thoughts should be ours, and we should be paid for our thoughts and have agency over it, for 200 years was considered sacrilegious. 200 years. Organized religion described it as sacrilegious. Because how dare you have thoughts of your own? They're not good. It must come from a book, man. You must read it from a book. That's the only time it's good. Today, I have an idea. I believe that just like we can have agency over our labor, which led to labor laws, and agency over our thoughts, which led to intellectual property laws, which today, every one of us in this room, and I assume you guys are the same species as me. I don't know whether you think I'm the same species as you. We are all two primary income species. Two primary sources of income. You have all sorts of secondary sources of income, but primary sources of income is labor, based on labor laws, thoughts, based on intellectual property laws. I believe we can become a three primary income species. And I know that this idea is on the fringe. I know that there are people that think it's blasphemy. I know that there are people who think it's sacrilegious. And I dare you to stand in the way. Here's how the history played out. All three of these things were initial ideas on the fringe. All three of them, eventually, there was a small community of people that realized that the outcome was inevitable. Here's where things start to get different. With labor and with thoughts, the problem was not growing exponentially. People weren't being enslaved exponentially. It was a linear line. The issue around data is growing exponentially. And I need a new word, because all I could say is exponentially exponential, which is not log 2, it's log 3. In the last 2 years, human beings created more data than we created and stored for the entire history of known data storage. And that will actually double every year, which means that in 10 years, it's going to be nuts. Human data is currently being traded and transacted for $276 billion per year between corporations. The price is only one thing. It's the mass manipulation that's the other, which we'll talk about in my closing remarks. The laws were always made from the bottom up. Labor, it was a grassroots movement, man. There was not a lot of people in power going, let's just pay people. Thoughts, it was a grassroots movement. There wasn't a lot of people in the churches going, oh yeah, let's give these writers a voice. We don't know how it's going to play out for data. And the last thing is that for each of these to come to life, it took about 200 to 400 years before the initial idea was introduced to the time that it was accepted and institutionalized across the planet. 200 to 400 years. I know I'm wasting the rest of my career, because I might not get it done in my lifetime. If you look at the three on the top, we have a problem that's growing exponentially, and we do not have the luxury to wait 200 to 400 years to sort it out. Here's what I mean about the problem, and I don't want to admire it too much. What's at risk with data if we don't have control over it? Forget the income inequality. Forget the fact that not everybody was born on salt, not everybody was born on oil, but everybody has data. Forget the fact that most of the value that came from salt and oil went to white males, and still today, in the next natural resource, most of the value that comes from data still goes to white males. Leave all of that out for a second. Data presents the first real risk where the species could be mass manipulated. There's a social media company right now that has an algorithm that after looking at your activity over a 30-day period, can predict with a high level of certainty, regardless of whether you are aware of it or not, where you are on the gender spectrum. That algorithm is not that hard to write. Just think about it. And what they're wrestling with is, do they have the ethical strength to not target or to target you with marketing content that's earmarked for where they think you may be on the sexual spectrum? And if they do target you, or they not target you, or you do know, or you not know, think about what that does to free will. We're a very feeble species. We're easy to manipulate. We're highly susceptible to cognitive priming, particularly with rich media and great story. That's our manufacturing flaw and our strength at the same time. If we don't get control of our data, we're looking at mass manipulation. So I'm doing the bottom-up approach, which is, let's fix the problem one at a time. The issue one at a time is that we have actually given corporations the permission to do what they're doing to us. Each and every one of us has signed a document, a binding contract with these corporations to do exactly what they're doing to us. Every time you hit I accept, you're signing a contract. I would imagine that everyone in this room has signed at least 500 to 1,000 contracts over the last 10 to 15 years with corporations. Most people are looking at me saying more. If I draw a picture of you, ma'am, with those contracts just strung onto you to show the microscopic pieces of your rights that you gave away, it might look like you're incarcerated in digital contracts. So what I'm doing is I'm working with organizations to free people, one contract at a time. I'm waging a war on the accept button. I'm also working from the top down. We don't have enough time to build it from the bottom up only. It's estimated today that of the 4 billion people connected on the internet, each of us click I accept at least twice per month, which is 100 billion I accepts per year. It's estimated that in 10 years, as more devices get smarter and they have more terms and conditions, and more people come online, and more paper contracts become digital, and more people own devices, that the human species will sign 500 billion I accept contracts every year. It's estimated today that global commerce runs on 3 trillion contracts between companies and corporations, of which were never read. Contracts live in a hierarchy. And at the top of all agreements in the planet is the 10 Commandments. And right below that is a thing called human rights. And the top-down approach that we need to get it sorted in time is we have to add another human right. 70 years ago, we created 30 human rights. They were fantastic for the problems that we had at the time. They didn't cater for the future. I've introduced, which is why I've been invited here, and thank you for that, the 31st human right. The language behind the 31st human right is that everyone has the right to legal ownership of their inherent human data as their property. Thank you very much.